sometimes we have a very rigid view of what creativity is, and as a result, we think we're not good at it, as if it is a measurable thing. So yeah, 100%, we need more of it, and we need more confidence that we can all be creative. I feel like, and why I was so excited to come and talk to you, I feel like you're recognizing the things we really should be thinking about when we're talking about educating children and young people.
Hi, welcome to Creative Minds Shaping the Future. I'm your host, Emma Palastanga. I'm an educator, author, and now podcast producer, curious to discuss a range of views on creativity and curriculum. Dr. Poppy Gibbson is an experienced educator of 18 years, interested in education, mental health and well-being. Poppy's first degree was in primary education, with a specialism in child behaviour and psychology of learning. She also holds a Master's in Education, a Master's in Mental Health Science, and a doctorate in Education from Oxford Brookes University. After teaching and leading in primary schools around London, Poppy moved into higher education to work on primary education degrees, supporting students to become primary school teachers. Her research centres on well-being and mental health in education and promoting positive outcomes for learners. Poppy is a writer for a number of educational publications and sits on the editorial board of Primary Teacher Update magazine. She has been a lecturer in education since 2017. Her key interests include children's learning and development, mental health and well-being in education, inclusion for neurodivergent learners and educators, preparing pupils for lifelong learning and becoming a valuable member of society, innovative computing and creative media to enhance lessons and learning. So, Dr. Poppy, welcome. Let's start with my opening question to all guests. How do you define creativity?
Oh, it's not often that I'm struggling with an answer on a podcast, but that's a big one. That's a big one to start with. I would say creativity should be about creation. It should be about creating something that didn't exist before and that has some kind of personal expression or personal meaning.
Based on that, do you think that creativity has a place in education? Why or why not?
Well, that's an easier one because I would say 100% yes. But you know as well as I do, Emma, that with some of the funding issues we have to not even buy the creative resources in the first place, whatever we think they may be, without the time that we need to really immerse ourselves in being creative, because I don't think it's something that can often be done quickly or in a half an hour lesson. I think it's tricky, but 100% we need to be fostering creativity. And a big part of that, I think, is fostering confidence in children and young people, because so many times I've gone in to teach a creativity workshop and teachers, even adult teachers, have said, I'm not creative. And I asked them, where have you heard this? Like, yes, you are. You're creative in how you styled your hair today, or the outfit you chose today, or the meal you cooked last night. You are creative. But sometimes we have a very rigid view of what creativity is. And as a result, we think we're not good at it, as if it is a measurable thing. So yeah, 100%, we need more of it, and we need more confidence that we can all be creative.
I think you've hit two things on the head there. One is about it being measurable. And in the previous episode, I talked to Pi Corbett about weighing the pig. And I think...
Yes, I love that episode. Can I just say, amazing episode.
Oh, thank you. But I also think that, we do in education, we feel the need to prove everything and weigh everything and measure everything. And I suppose the question is, how do you do that with creativity? And even a deeper question would be, should we do that with creativity? So that's one thing that brought up. And the other thing that you said, I think there isn't one clear-cut definition. You said that right at the beginning. Not often are you stumped, but
Yeah.
to define creativity. And that's why I have it as a key question for every guest,
I love
because I
it.
think we all define it differently. And if we define it one way, then we believe we're not creative. One of my heroes or heroines, if you like, is Anna Kraft.
Yeah.
She talks about little c creativity, which is everyday problem solving. And primarily, that's what this series of podcasts has been about, the little c, the everyday, the problem solving, the making connections, making links in our learning. But big C creativity, I think, is just as important. And it's what my next series will go on to explore about
Wow.
creative expression. So, why is
Wow.
that important? And how does that impact us as human beings? And how does it impact education?
I love that. I love how I feel like, and why I was so excited to come and talk to you, I feel like you're recognizing the things we really should be thinking about when we're talking about educating children and young people. And I love that you mentioned Anna Kraft. At my previous uni, one of the modules I used to teach to our trainee teachers was actually the creativity module. And I used to say, if Anna Kraft isn't on your reference list, I will not be impressed, because I don't think you can talk about creativity, particularly in the primary school, without knowing Anna Kraft's work. And yes, I used to say we're going to be mentioning the C word a lot today, and really grappling with the big C, the little c. And I think that's such a refreshing approach. But back to your first question there around measuring, I think that's another thing, particularly with my student teachers and trainee teachers, is the confusion where we're almost indoctrinated to think that everything we teach should be measurable. Everything we deliver should have a learning outcome
Yeah.
and a learning objective. Everything should have a Walt and a Wilf and a working wall. And I'm like, let's move away from these W's to
Yeah.
the C. Let's
C's.
think about actually freedom of expression, finding our voices, thinking about different parts of ourselves that traditionally through our curriculum we haven't let children explore. So I think that's what sometimes, and this is just my opinion from what I've seen anecdotally, sometimes what scares ECTs, trainee teachers, is how will I know if I've done it right?
Yeah.
Because we like to know that we've delivered something well. And I've seen a range of ways teachers have done that. For example, here's a painting of sunflowers by Vincent van Gogh. I want everybody to try and paint this exact
Yeah.
painting.
Let's
And
replicate it.
let's replicate it. And then the question there is that being creative? And I would say you're teaching them the medium of whichever paints they've got, maybe it's acrylics or oil. So you're teaching something there that is valuable, but are you really teaching them to be creative? And I would argue no. And ways that I've seen that done better is, so I feel like now, what's that one? Even better if, is
Even
that
better if.
I feel like
EBI.
I am going into teacher mode now. Even better if, for example, you show Vincent van Gogh's work, tell about his history, his life, and then encourage them to think, which flowers would you like to paint, or bring in some fresh flowers on the tables and children paint their own vase. That's ways that I'm sure we've all seen it done better, because then children are learning about the artist, they're learning the medium, but their creativity is coming through in the way they interpret it, and not trying to paint it in the same way. Paint it in a way that feels right to you. Maybe you're going to have something that looks exactly like the flowers. You want it to be very realistic, or maybe yours is actually more abstract, and that's okay. So also letting children feel a little bit more free when it comes to, and I know what I've done very wrong here is I've started talking about art lessons. Because again, of course, Emma, creativity should not just be seen as being the arts. But again, I'm indoctrinated, I guess, into thinking that it is. So yes, I would argue we should not be measuring it. We should see teaching children to be creative as giving them confidence in their skills, in opening their minds, in encouraging them to take risks and think outside the box. And the reason I think it's so important, I'm sure we'll discuss later in this episode, because that's what they'll need in the future.
Yeah.
That's the skill they're going to need, isn't it?
Absolutely. And no, yes, I'm glad you pointed out that creativity isn't just art. That goes back to another guest actually, who we talked a lot about that. It's not just Friday afternoons drawing a cat or whatever. But actually, what you were talking about, although you used art as your example, you were talking about creative teaching. And that's something that I feel really passionately about. That's what a creative primary curriculum for all, the book that I've written, is about. It's not just for the children, it's for the children, but it's also about the teachers, and it's also about creative leadership within the school as well. And I think alongside creativity, you need to be quite brave as well, because it's
Yeah.
about doing things differently. It's about innovation. So you need to be bold and brave and go, do you know what? We're not doing it that way. We're doing it this way. We're allowing this to happen. That freedom that you talked about, the limitations on the constraints, and a common gripe I often hear from teachers and see on social media channels is, oh, the blooming national curriculum, we're so constrained by the national curriculum. And actually, when you unpick the national curriculum, yes, there is a lot in there, agreed, but it's not about getting through it like a tick box exercise. If you combine the subjects together,
Mhm.
make those connections, you can cover a lot more. And actually, more than just covering it, you can get really into it, really in depth, really creative expression,
Yes.
creative design of your curriculum, creative thinking within it. I think there is so much to be had if your curriculum is there as a framework, is
Mhm.
what you do with it. And I think Pi Corbett said objectives are boring, it's what we do with them that matters.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Yes, I picked that out in that episode. And I think one thing we can do to really feed into that and what Pi is saying there is how we talk about creativity. So one thing that I encourage my student teachers to do is if you're teaching a maths lesson and we know all about the reasoning and the greater depth, but if a child approaches a problem in a different way to everyone else, they've still got the right answer, but they've done it a different way. And you say that's a really creative way to
Yeah.
solve that question and really normalize that we can be creative in any lesson, in any space, at any time of day, because it's really creativity is about making new pathways in our brain. And as Pi said, making something happen or something exist that didn't exist before. So even answering a maths question is being
Yes.
creative.
Absolutely. And you're really now going back to Anna Craft and what she says is
Mhm.
creativity across the curriculum. And that's where my real passion lies, that it isn't just in art, it is in maths, it is in science about how we solve this, it is in English, the way that we write, but it is also in just thinking. We might not actually produce anything on paper. It
Yeah.
might just be the way that we solve a problem. It could be a friendship problem. It doesn't have to be academic.
Yeah.
Thinking of primary school squabbles in the playground and thinking of
Yes.
a solution to that problem. That's creative thinking.
I love that. That's so true. Yeah. And I think adding the word thinking at the end,
Mm,
can be a really useful way for making people understand what it means to be creative. Creative thinking really is about approaching something with your own personal, interesting perspective and really encouraging everyone to think that your version of creativity matters and
mm.
you do have something to offer even if you think you're not creative. You're solving problems every day.
So that's where I expand on Anna's definitions. I talk about little c creativity as being creative thinking and
Yeah,
big C creativity as creative doing.
I love that.
If you think back to your own childhood or your days in the classroom, I know you're now lecturing, so
Mhm.
it could be from there as well, but it could be from the primary classroom. What is your most memorable lesson in terms of creativity, however you might define that?
Ooh, okay. So can I share two? Can I
Yes, please do.
share one when I was a child and one that I've delivered to
Yeah.
training teachers? Okay, cool. So I'll start with when I was a child. And I was very lucky enough to go to a private girls' primary school. My mum worked really hard and saved to put me through private school. So I must say it was very heavily academic. But
Mhm.
one lesson that did stand out for me was a D&T lesson, a design technology, where we had to make, and I'm sure this is still happening in schools, by the way, listeners, we had to make rubber band cars. Have you ever
Yes.
done that, Emma? And I
Yes.
remember, oh, it was so fun. I think we had to bring in a shoebox, and then we
Cotton
had
reels.
cotton reels, yes, cotton reels, and wooden discs for the wheels, and there was doweling, I seem to remember
Yes.
that's what it's called, and a glue gun was definitely involved. And we then would put the rubber band between the axles and spin it round, and then, I mean, I can't remember the exact ins and outs. We would race our cars in the playground. And I don't know why, out of all the education I've done, this has always stayed with me. And do you know why, Emma? I think it's because my car wasn't the best. And I think quite often when I approach things in life, I don't know about you, but I'm definitely a perfectionist and I'm definitely a people pleaser. And I remember building my car so carefully, watching the teacher model, building mine exactly the same, feeling really confident. And then I remember when it came to, we took our cars out into the playground. It was probably a nice summer afternoon in July, and I was feeling good. My car's going to win. And I know we say it's taking part that counts, but it's not. It's definitely winning that counts when you're racing a rubber band car. And I just remember us all lining up. You know, when in the playground you have the painted lines for the netball.
Yes.
I remember us all standing there, wheeling up our cars, you know, spinning the elastic band ready to create the tension, putting them down. And I just remember mine didn't win and thinking, oh, but then, you know, surviving and thinking that's okay, but also realizing you're not always going to be the best. It was a tough pill to swallow, but it also made me realize, you know what, you can have fun without always being the winner at the end of it. So that was, I guess that was creative.
Do you think it was the element of fun then that made it memorable?
Hmm.
Or do you think it was the I didn't win, but it's okay that made it memorable? Because that's another thing I think with creativity. We encourage children to take risks
Yeah,
in a safe environment, but it is also fun. So for
yeah,
me, I think those are two elements why creativity is so important.
yes. I love that. And honestly, Emma, I've not thought about this rubber band car lesson for decades. It's funny, it's come to my mind now. I can't remember what I did last week, but I've managed to recall this lesson. Yeah, I would say you've probably completely put your finger on it there. It was about having fun, new skills. You know, I've never built a rubber band car before, so putting yourself in that challenge zone, and then the whole experience. You know, seeing purpose. I think that's another good one. The
Mm,
purpose in creativity, and maybe the purpose is just to make yourself feel better. You know, maybe it's writing a letter to yourself to make yourself understand or process something. For this, the purpose was to learn how to create the car. I think it was like partly physics as well, and also the purpose was that you would build a workable model to have the race. So I think for me it was also seeing why it was relevant, why it was purposeful, seeing something through to completion. And I think that's another thing we sometimes miss a little bit in education. We teach children skills, but they never get to use them in the real world. You know, you're teaching a child how to measure your mom's patio for some new patio slabs. Like, why? Actually, much more fun. I used to teach, you know, maths through Minecraft, for example, and when you go home, you might want to make this on Minecraft if you're a
yeah.
gamer. So making things purposeful. So I think there's something there in definitely fun, risk, and purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that was one of the things that we really honed in on is the purpose for
Yeah.
learning. I remember, I know I've said this on another episode, but it's so relevant here, learning trigonometry and maths. And I just said to my teacher, well, I'm never going to be a builder. I won't be making roof trusses. Why am I learning this? And it was so frustrating because I thought, what is the point of me learning this? And I think
For you when you
every,
were heckling, how old were you there?
um, probably 12, 14,
I
somewhere
love
between that.
this. And you carried on being a maverick, so I love that as well. She didn't deter you.
Thanks, Poppy. You were going to tell me about your experience of teaching the teachers now and the
Yes. Okay.
creativity
So
there.
this is a secret between you and the listeners because if you hear this, you have my full permission to repeat it yourself, particularly if you're someone who's working with training teachers. Oh my goodness. I used to do this, although now I work at the Open University, so my students are online. So I don't do it. But for the last 7 years, it used to be I would use it as the opener in that creativity module I mentioned. So lecture one, my students, I normally have, I know, 100 students, they'd all come into the lecture theatre. they knew it was the first lesson on creativity, that I'd have set out in the lecture theatre on the little desk. So you imagine lecture theatre is a room, you know, with 200 seats with little desks on each chair. So I would put a piece of paper and a pencil on every desk. So the students would come in and sit down. Now, what's on the paper is what's important. So on my laptop, I had on a Word document, and I'm describing it just in case anyone for fun wants to try it. On the document, I think at the top, I put probably something like lesson 1 of creativity module, just for their records, because some students were very diligent. They like to file things. And then all it had, kind of in the middle-ish of the paper, was a box. So almost like a frame, you know, ready for you to draw a picture in the middle of it. So on the paper, it just had this title and then a box that kind of filled 2/3 of the page. So it was almost like, you know, it was a box in the middle of the paper ready to be filled. So the students would come in and I'd say, right, to warm up, I'm going to see how creative you are. There's a worksheet and a pencil. You've got 5 minutes. Be creative as you like. And I think I'd put on some music in the background, depending how I was feeling that day, you know, a bit of classical music or Kiss FM or whatever. There'd be the students like laughing, saying, oh my gosh, I'm rubbish at drawing, you know, looking at each other's going, that's so good. And they would all be sketching away for 5 minutes. Some would be straight in there, some would take a bit longer, kind of thinking, what am I going to draw? And then after the 5 minutes, I would say, right, everyone, pencils down, hold up your worksheet. And everyone in the room would hold up the worksheet. Now, how crazy is this? I did this for 7 years consistently. Every time, apart from one student ever, so you're talking about 1 out of, I don't know, 700 students. Every time they would hold up their piece of paper, can you guess? They had all drawn a lovely doodle. It could be anything, it could be a flower, quite often flowers and cats and dogs, that kind of thing. They could draw anything inside the box. And only ever once did a student draw outside the box. I think they decorated the box. I can't remember what it was now, but maybe they drew flowers around the outside of the rectangle. But every other time, consistently, and it used to blow the students' minds when I'd say, look around, every single one of you, apart from that one time, has drawn inside the box. And I was like, that is what is wrong with our education system. We have been taught to stay inside the box, stay in your lane, you know, act in a way that fits into society. And I said, I didn't say draw in the box. No. I just said draw something on your paper. But because we are conditioned to think, what does the teacher want from us? They were thinking, what does my lecturer want? She's asked me to draw something. Oh, there's a box. Like, how often do we give children lined paper, or there's lines where you put the answer there? They have been, and I used the word indoctrinated earlier, but I can't think of a better word. We've been institutionalized to fill the box, tick the box, even as adults, tick the box, put an X in the box. And so every time it would give me goosebumps when they'd be looking around. I'd say, what have you all done? You've all drawn in the box. And we were like, oh, and there would just be like a moment of silence while everyone gasped. And we were like, this is the perfect teachable moment. Let's push ourselves out of the box to push young people and children out of the box.
That's brilliant, because the phrase that comes to mind is, let's think outside the box.
Yeah.
You've literally illustrated that one person in around 700. Yeah. And that's why it's so crucial. Like you said it so brilliantly there, Poppy. It is really crucial. I remember teaching lessons where I said, well, what do you think? It may have been a time, actually, my brother, who's a scientist, came into school and did a workshop for the children. And he said, what do you think? And they all looked at each other and they looked at me like, you know, what's the right answer? What should we say? And I had to say to them, no, there is no right answer. I've said that many times in my career, actually. There is no right answer. It's what do you think? As long as you can give me a reason why you think it, support that, justify your reasoning, what you think is what you think. And that's absolutely fine.
Wow. Wow. That's it. I love that.
I think we need more of that, don't we?
Yes, we need more of that. Come on, let's unite. What's our next crusade going to be? Let's put together. So
exactly. How are you creative at work or at home? You've given us one example of work, how you encourage your trainee teachers to be creative. But What other ways are you creative in your life broadly?
Okay. Unfortunately, I would say I don't paint, but I think for me, a lot of my creativity is definitely through looking for things that need to be answered. So with my research, I'm really lucky now that I'm working, yes, as a lecturer, but I would say more of my time is research now. So I love looking for the gaps in our knowledge in society, the gaps in our knowledge in education, or where we could learn a bit more, particularly from lived experience of people, because I think that's where we're moving with research now. We're understanding we can't just capture things in a lab. We really need to find people with daily experience and talk to them and capture their voices. So I guess now I'm currently working on 5 research projects. For me, it's about thinking, what do we need to know a bit more about, and then writing a grant application or writing an ethics application, and then getting involved, getting elbows deep in trying to learn a bit more about something. For me, that's how I love being creative, and I love designing research projects, thinking, what's our methodology going to be? What's our research method going to be? And there's a really cool one actually that I've just started with Joe Rose. He's at Sheffield Hallam, and we've come up with this idea based on, there was it's very famous if anyone listening is a psychology student or study psychology. There was a study done in the 1960s on the Isle of Sheppey by someone called Max Pahl. And what Pahl did is Pahl, in case anyone wants to look it up. It's one of the most fascinating studies I've ever heard about. Pahl went to the Isle of Sheppey, which you can imagine is a little microcosm in itself. And he asked the English teachers to set a task for the children who were just about to leave secondary school. So these children were 16 years old, about to go into the big wide world in whatever ways they wanted to. And Pahl asked the English teachers to support this research project by asking the soon-to-be school leavers to write an essay of their imagined future. So the instruction was, you're 16 at the moment, but imagine you're towards the end of your life. Imagine you're 60, imagine you're 70, looking back at your life, which hasn't happened yet. So here's the creative bit. Write an essay looking back at your life. And what Pahl did, I think it was 141 essays from the young people. Pahl then looked through the essays, and what's really quite chilling and interesting, you can also access these essays as a secondary source to look through. I studied them myself as a psychology module. So many of them, these young people clearly had a lot of worries about aging. They were saying things like, oh, I'm so useless now, I'm so old, all I do is look out the window at the children in the park. And so many of them imagined grief. They were like, oh, my husband's died, I'm all alone. And it was really interesting. Like, clearly there's a separate thing there about fear of aging, but it was also really interesting to see, what did they want to do? What was their ambition? Some of them, one person said, I opened my own hairdressers, and I recruited people that had a hard start in life, and I trained them up to be hairdressers. Like, how cool is that this 16-year-old imagined they were going to have this big business venture? And I hope they did. Unfortunately, I never read if Pahl kind of checks in on them, which would have been really great to hear, 10 years later. So that really inspired me. When I read about that, I thought, how creative and cool is that? Research doesn't have to be boring. So I've just passed ethics a couple of weeks ago, and now Joe and I are looking at lecturers to do the same. So we've asked lecturers in education to imagine their future. Imagine you're 70, 80, looking back at life. And we're really trying to focus on, where does education fit? And so we're hoping that we will see, is education a big part, a small part? Do they stay in education? Because they're in education now, obviously, as lecturers. What happens? Do they imagine they win the lottery and move to the Bahamas? Do they do a PhD? Do they stay, as a professor till they're 70? So we're quite excited. We haven't got the data back yet. But yeah, for me, I feel like that's how I'm creative. I've come up with this different perspective on an original idea. So yeah, I would say I find creativity through my work, and I think that's why I just love my work so much. I don't know if you could tell that from the way I just ranted at you for like 5
No, it's
minutes.
lovely. The passion definitely comes across, and I'm jotting down keywords and phrases like different perspectives, new ideas, and purpose in creativity. One of the things you said was about PAL. If you can email me the links, then I
Yeah,
can put them as a link to the podcast, then people can access them easily.
amazing. I will do.
We've talked a bit, well, quite a lot about how you're creative, and you have alluded to some of the things that you're doing currently. What is next for you? So are there any other things sort of on the horizon?
Well, so as I mentioned, I'm currently working on some research, something really great that I'm working on that we'll just be finishing up this autumn is I'm doing a research project with Sampawerna University in Jakarta in Indonesia, which involves the amazing experience getting to travel there, which I did in June, which was incredible, and a chance to work with researchers from Jakarta. And that's in collaboration with Professor Staranova, who's our lead of our project. She's at Anglia Ruskin University. Sarah Wall, who's at ARU, and me, and then our team over there. There are 9 of us, 9 academics. We've been exploring how we support neurodiversity in adults and in adult students and adult lecturers. So we're kind of taking a dual approach, not just what's best for students, but I think sometimes in education we also forget what's best for teachers. So you were saying at the start, Emma, like creativity is also about the teachers. So we're looking at how we support students and teachers at university level when they're neurodivergent and understanding best practice. So that's really cool. So kind of finishing up the other projects. As for what comes next, I don't know if you're the same, but I mean, I'm always just dreaming what comes next. So who knows? I'll probably think about 5 careers by the time we finish this podcast. But I think sometimes you never know what comes next. And for anyone listening, my advice would be just put yourself out there. So, you know, that study I just mentioned with Joe Rose that we're doing with Imagine Futures, I only met Joe. He'd written a little book for one of my books, but we'd never met in person. I put myself out there at a conference in Norfolk earlier this year. And at the conference, I met Joe in the flesh, and Joe came up and said, I wrote for your book. And I was like, oh my goodness, hi, Joe. And then he came to my workshop. I was talking about this project, and he was like, I want to be part of it. So this all happened because of putting yourself out there. So I definitely think, and like with our book, Emma, as well, I loved writing the book with you and Marie because, and it's actually back to what I said at the start, it's about perspective. And I think the best things we create often are where there's more than one of us, because you get to learn from someone else. I think it makes you think more about your own perspective when you're having to share it with someone. So I would say for anyone listening, put yourself out there, whether it's going to a conference, even if it's online, whether it's setting up a LinkedIn account if you don't have one and sharing something you're doing. Don't be afraid, even send someone a little email or a message like, I see you're interested in the same thing as me. Do you fancy writing something together or doing some research? Because actually that's when the best things happen. So I don't know what comes next. I'm sure I'll be sneaking some people's DMs once I find a bit of spare time and looking for more things to do. So
And I think you're right. What I found fascinating is for years I've been on LinkedIn and I've messaged people and liked their posts and commented here and there. And this year, particularly after several years of kind of being low level on LinkedIn particularly, I'm having a lot more interactions, a lot more connections. It's kind of, I think we connected actually through X, through Twitter. And I find it fascinating that we were able to write an entire book having never met one another in the flesh.
It's incredible, isn't it? It's incredible. And I think that shows as well the power of creativity, because it shows that it's not about a physical space. It is about your mind. It's about thinking, reflecting, collaborating. And so yeah, super grateful that you did approach me, and I guess we will hopefully finally meet when we have our book launch. So
Absolutely. And I'm thrilled that you actually said yes to writing with me. You know, you never know, do you?
I did not say no to that.
But again, it's about taking risks, isn't it? And be willing to take that risk of somebody saying no or it not working out as planned. But, you know, fingers crossed, we have now submitted. So, you know, hopefully this will continue. So
yeah, definitely.
And my final question, actually, who else would you like to hear on Creative Minds Shaping the Future, and why?
Right. This is a hard one because I have so many people, but do you know what? Someone does stand out to me. I have one amazing ex-student. She was on a teacher training course with me, a primary education degree, and I was her course lead and lecturer. Her name is Natasha. Now, Natasha is amazing because she actually is a big advocate of art. And when Natasha was on my course, I did a little student conference. I just wanted to, get the students to share voices. I set up this little conference. It's just, a couple of hours, and the students came along and some of them could present. And Natasha did everything we just said, Emma. She took a risk, she had confidence in herself, she came up with an idea, and she presented a really lovely talk all about the value of art in the primary school. And she's also an incredible artist herself, even though I know we said it's not about art. Her pictures, once she just casually showed me some amazing paintings. I remember there's like an elephant, and I was just like, why are you hiding your light under a bushel? These are amazing. So I think Natasha would be incredible. I'm actually, after this podcast, I'm going to message her and say, check your DMs for Emma might be coming for you, because Natasha really is the most passionate advocate of art. And I think she also, off the top of my head, did something about museums and museum learning. So thinking about learning in that creative space. So I definitely think Natasha would be great. So yes, Natasha, if you're listening to this episode, please do it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Poppy. You've said some fantastic things there about, new pathways in our brain, the purpose in creativity. We've talked about creative teaching. I love that imagery. I can see it in my head, the box where only 1 in 700 are drawing outside the box. So let's help more people to think outside the box, be creative, and, prepared for an uncertain future, because we don't know what's around the corner. And if we provide our young people with the skills to solve problems and innovate, then we're setting them up for a good future ahead.
Definitely. Well, Emma, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on the show. This has been so fun to actually make time to talk about being creative, which isn't something that I find on many podcasts. So hence why I love the work you're doing. I love your mission. Keep it up. And look, I hope that we get to work together again really, really soon.
Definitely. Thanks, Poppy.
Thanks, Emma.
I hope you found Poppy's thoughts on creativity insightful and you're more confident about your own creativity. Next month, my guest is Kavita Tanner.
Neuroscience shows us that we can actually see something happening in the brain when creativity is emerging. Just know this isn't conducive to creativity if it's not leaving any space or room to question.
I have some fantastic guests lined up. Some you will know and some you will want to know. I'm really excited to announce I'll be releasing this podcast once a month, and I'll be talking with philosophers, artists, mathematicians, scientists, engineers, innovators, and educators. If this sounds like you, maybe you have a view on creative thinking or creative expression, please get in touch by following me at ACPC4A, the number 4, on X, or Emma Palastanger on LinkedIn to connect. Please subscribe to this podcast so that you can stay up to date on the release of each episode. Thanks so much, and I'll see you on the next episode of Creative Minds Shaping the Future.